and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage founder of HillVets, Justin Brown.
All right, good morning. How's everybody doing today? All right, the coffee's working. There's energy already. All right, yeah, my main purpose up here today is to get everybody excited for an incredible day of policy and, frankly, leveling up. This year's CAPCON is, frankly, very unique in this series of CAPCONs. It's crazy to me to think that this is our 8th iteration of HillVets Lead. HillVets started as an organization to help veterans get their start on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and to really build a community for veterans, service members, survivors, and family members here in our nation's capital. We started trying to help veterans get their start on Capitol Hill with a fellowship program, HillVets House. And we then moved on to trying to help veterans and the military connected who are here in DC, frankly, move from doing great things to the next level. And that's how we started HillVets Lead. So for us to be in our 8th iteration, to have so many supporters, friends, and alumni is always really exciting to see. What I love about this CAPCON is it's really the first time that we also have tried to build in a series of workshops. So anything from getting your first job on Capitol Hill to getting a political appointment at the White House or in the federal government, to running for office. We've really tried to cover a number of bases. So I hope you really get a lot out of today. I'd be remiss to not thank our many, many partners. I'll thank more of them later, but certainly Oracle Health for hosting us today in this incredible space. It's our second time having CAPCON here. I'm incredibly excited. And I guess my first order of business is to get the day started by introducing our first panel. Please welcome them to the stage.
All right, thank you, Justin. Welcome everyone to CAPCON. Tom Peacher. I'm a lead protege here with HillVets. Extremely excited to be hosting this first panel with our awesome panelists here today on veteran entrepreneurship. We have Kieran Carroll. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at ZeroEyes. We have Stephen Pollan, CEO and founder of Assessment Technologies Group and Pelocity, and Yusuf Henriques, CEO and founder of IndyGeneUS and IndyGeneUS Global. Welcome, gentlemen. Extremely excited to get into it. So first off, I want to give you guys an opportunity to take 2 or 3 minutes, share your story. How did you get into tech and entrepreneurship? What led you here today? Kieran, we'll kick it off with you.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. These are really comfortable chairs, by the way. This might be coming home with me after this. Yeah. So quick story. So I was born here in DC, actually right across the river there in Georgetown. Went to high school in the area. Was really fortunate to get an appointment to the Naval Academy. I went to the Navy after graduation. I was a really bad surface warfare officer for about 10 years. And I basically lucked into my current role. After I left the military, I went and got my MBA, went to consulting for a little bit. And then while I was in Philly, and people are always like, well, why'd you go to Philly? And I moved to Philly for the best reason. It was for love. My wife was up there. I really wanted to be here in DC, but it was really fortuitous because I met a couple incredible entrepreneurs who were also former Navy guys. They're former SEALs. And after the Parkland shooting happened, what they were working on was a computer vision solution that was designed to integrate to existing security cameras. Just so everyone knows, there's about 100 million commercial security cameras here in the United States today. That number is constantly growing. And they built a software that could integrate to those cameras to look for a visible firearm. Most active shooter events, if I don't know if people know this or not, but they tend to start under field of view of an existing security camera, and the perpetrator has a visible firearm. So this team of just guys that kind of bootstrap the business and just sort of figure stuff out were able to build a really incredible software product and then take it to market. And I started working sort of on the side for free for about a year. Before we raised a little bit of money, enough for some of us to sort of quit our jobs and join the team full time. So that's sort of the background, and then where ZeroEyes is in the market today. Our software right now is in close to 30 states across various K through 12 districts. We work with a large number of commercial enterprise organizations, Fortune 500s, and that kind of thing. And then more recently, we've just split out our federal government business that largely supports the Department of Defense. So we've grown from basically seven dudes in a basement, who bootstrapped the company into, currently we have about 165 employees. So we've grown pretty significantly.
Steven?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. I am not military. My brothers were military, but I was not. What's been interesting is I hope that my story doesn't scare you. I hope that, at the end you'll have some great questions to think about as for entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurship really is the future, I think, for many of the veterans that are transitioning. I think Forbes just said that there was 28% of all transitioning military post 9/11 will go into some form of entrepreneurship. So it's really exciting to hear about what that is. Where mine came into play with our technology is our parent company, ATG, is a global technology HR consulting firm. However, what was really interesting about it is that we realized that there was going to be a shift in technology and what we call talent as a service. So about 8 years ago, we started developing our technology called Pelocity. Well, what was interesting is that I wanted to focus, oftentimes with your advisors and your investors, they say, we need you to focus, quit being, I'm sure that you've seen the McDonald's commercial where the coach is sitting there telling his kid, saying, great game, everything else, the kid goes grasshopper and they all go jumping towards it. Well, that's kind of what entrepreneurs do. So it's really hard for us to stay focused in the areas that we do, but I really felt that because living in Jacksonville, Florida, all the military that we're very fortunate to work with, we have all 5 branches of the military there, that we were realized that what's really interesting, and we've heard it more than once, is that here you would think, our military that have been in action and have been all around the world and everything else, and you sit down and talk to them, they go, what is, he goes, I'm scared. I go, what are you scared about? And they go, I'm scared about leaving the military and going to the civilian workforce. So anyway, our technology is really kind of unique in that what it does is that we have 2 very distinct pathways. One of the pathways is that they can take a pro-track side. They want to continue to do what they did in the military, in the civilian workforce. And then there's what we call the career guidance side. So it allows our military and spouses to go through our technology, and it allows them to give them, we take a very science-based approach because many of the companies that we work with around the world, once they find their candidate, the first thing they're going to say is, I want to assess the candidate. Well, our technology already does that. So we're actually streamlining the onboarding process and allowing the individuals to maybe potentially think about career pathways that they never dreamt of. What's interesting is that they'll say, Steve, I took it, and these top 15 I don't want to do. And I said, well, you didn't ask me what you wanted to do. You asked me, what are you good at? So that's what our technology does. We're very fortunate that we're national. We're continuing to expand our presence at all the military bases. Our primary focus right now is like with the Wounded Warrior Project, O2O, which is Onward to Opportunity, which is a Syracuse University initiative. Also P3, which is for all our reservists and our guards, and also with the USO. So we're super excited about being up here and sharing our story with you, and nice having you here this morning.
Yusuf.
Good morning, Yusuf Henriques, founder and CEO of IndyGeneUS. My career started in the science field since a young kid growing up in Kingston, Jamaica, watching Doogie Howser. So I've always been fascinated with figuring out problems quickly. So it was only natural. I came to the States in high school. I excelled in science and math, took the ASVAB and excelled in those areas and joined the military as a combat medic. And so, that has been what been able to let me dovetail into entrepreneurship, because being a medic, you gotta think quick on your feet. Being able to solve problems within that golden hour translated into me then leaving the government after working for the FDA and medical devices and drug approvals, and then moved into drug discovery. My last position in the government for the VA was looking at PTSD biomarkers, which I fell in love with the emerging technology, which is what we're using now today to detect pathogens, which is next-gen sequencing, which is going to be leapfrogging digital transformation into what the future of precision medicine looks like. But yeah, I had the same ideas around being a career employee in the government, and we'll touch on a little bit more on that as we go, but I just felt like I was a shark in a fish tank. because innovation was kind of slow. And then I started to figure out what are all these big companies, Cerner and Booz Allen, these big consulting firms that were, looked like they were the answer to my problem, which was, thinking innovatively and being able to streamline some of the innovation that the government had been working on. So my first company, this is my second company, so I'm an addict now, right? Once you start the first one, you start jumping into others. And so in 2018, I took the technology that I was working on, which was PTSD biomarkers, which was approved using Holocaust survivors and World Trade Center survivor bloods, with next-gen sequencing, and found genes that had a direct correlation with your predisposition to PTSD. And losing so many veterans per year to suicide, I just felt compelled that I wanted that R&D not to sit on the shelf, which most of the R&D sits on the shelves within the government once they've done their research and development. So I convinced Mount Sinai with one-man company in 2018 to get the exclusive rights to the patent, and took it out to Silicon Valley, where we developed a gene expression assay for anxiety, depression, bipolar, and PTSD. That work led me to get some involvement with MIT and their hacking medicine program. And so when COVID happened, I ended up doing 25 hackathons during COVID and spun out IndyGeneUS, which is now looking at health disparities and the lack of diversity of women and minority in the clinical trial space. And so that's where I've been spending a lot of my time over the last 6 years in the entrepreneur space, and looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. Stephen, you mentioned that 28% of veterans getting out looking to get into entrepreneurship. What advice would you give them in terms of surviving that kind of valley of death we so often see with startups and pushing through that?
Sure. First and foremost is finding something that's a fit for you. Oftentimes we think about, and you hear from the panelists up here, that it was where they started that ultimately drove to where they are today. Oftentimes, when I ask entrepreneurs, why are you going in that particular field, and they say, because I want to make a lot of money. Well, what you'll find as an entrepreneur, if you get in it initially to make a lot of money, that's just not going to be. You'll hear the stories up here where 25 startup pitch deck, with your pitch decks and talking with literally 50 to 100 different potential investors, and they all say they love you. And we were laughing about it in the room earlier. It said that if they all love us, how come they're not writing a check? And we said, well, one person finally said one day is that, look, you'll know when they really love you is when their check hits the bank. So really, it's just that part of making sure that you're doing it for the right reasons.
Yusuf, I know as a serial startup visionary, I'm sure you have some insights, some advice you could give to veterans looking to found their own startups.
You gotta be passionate about this. It's a long haul, and it's lonely sometimes because you're the one with the vision. Not everybody sees it at the beginning, right? So when I had the idea to build a blood test for PTSD, everybody looked at me like I had 4 heads. And my parents looked at me like I was crazy when I quit my $200,000 SAIC government contracting job at Ditcher. Even more crazy. She thought I should see a doctor. But I think to the point is, you're the one. Yeah, you got to live and breathe this, right? It's a grind. But I think because I have a passion and purpose behind what I'm doing, it gets me up every morning. So some days you have good days, and some days you're gonna have bad, and so. But I do encourage veterans, because I do go and speak at other accelerators, but to take that jump, because it's the lifeblood of America. Startups are what's creating the innovation, not the big companies. And so what you'll hear and see on this panel are individuals that saw an area that needed some innovation and some technology that could advance what we're doing, and you have to take that jump. So we need more veterans, again, because I think the leadership and training that we've had at such a young age makes us a perfect candidate for it, but it also has its risk and its reward as well.
Kieran, I know ZeroEyes goes out of their way to hire veterans. Just be interested to hear, what value do you see veterans add? Where do you see them being an asset most in that world?
I think if you look at the stats, after World War II, it's something like 75% of veterans that return to the workforce started their own business. That's what the country needed to kickstart us after the Great Depression, followed by 5 years of war. Veterans are mentally tough and resilient, and we were used to hardship, and we were used to risk, and we're very, for the most part, we're very thoughtful analysts, I think. And I think that's the right mixture for folks to be successful as an entrepreneur. I don't have hard stats on this, but I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority of veterans who start down the entrepreneurship path are ultimately successful. Maybe it's not initially, maybe they had to pivot into other things. But I think the same attributes that the military attracts are also very valuable for entrepreneurship. And then as far as why we hire veterans, and Tom just alluded to this, about I think close to almost 70% of our company right now is a military veteran or a military spouse or a dependent. And it's for the same reasons I just mentioned. We hire folks that are really tough mentally, that understand the risk versus reward divide, that are also coachable, right? We are used to working in teams. That was the biggest culture shock I had when I first left the military and went into a Big Four consulting. The team element there, it wasn't as defined as what we're used to as veterans. But in the startup world, I mean, you live or die as a team, similar to that in the military.
Stephen, I want to bring it back to you. What could companies do to better leverage this 28% of veterans that want to get into startups? How can they capitalize on that?
Well, I think what's interesting, as Kieran said, is that they have such a unique mindset when they're coming out. And there's so much opportunity, but I think one of the things that when we're coaching our veterans as they're coming out is understanding is that the world's your canvas, and that you need to take what you have learned. And every company that we work with, we're finding that they're accelerating the onboarding process of our military. 50% of my workforce is military spouses. I find that, to Kieran's point, is that the companies today, when they talk about soft skills and hard skills, they're talking about everything that is taught in the military. And companies today are saying, we're struggling because on our ATG side, they're saying we need to do team roles development. They don't understand the conceptual part of being part of a team. And it's just natural, it's just innate in our military as they're coming out, and also for the military spouses. It's amazing because, especially the ones that are in the Navy that continue to have to move around the world and things of that nature, that resilience that they bring to the table is just unbelievable. I mean, they're able to come in. Lisa here today, she went from Tampa to here in DC and hit the ground running. I mean, you take very little as far as motivation and things of that nature. I just think that what they bring to the table, they're so far ahead of the traditional employees that companies are hiring that they're finding the real value in onboarding them.
And I want to hear from all of you on this, but we'll start with Yusuf. Stephen just spoke on the importance of resilience, and with entrepreneurship and startups comes some really high highs and some really low lows. I'd love to hear just maybe a few of those obstacles you faced in this journey, and how you got through them and how you came out on the other side.
Oh man, I have plenty of those. It's again, I think once you're leading with the passion, I think early on, because I'm not an MBA, so a lot of the business aspect of running a company was a bit challenging. But what was good for me is that I started finding organizations like HillVets and other military programs that started to foster entrepreneurship, which was something a little different from when I just got out. Everybody was telling you to go get a job. And so, groups and organizations that I started to get those skills, those hard and soft skill set that I didn't have, outside of, what was driving my tenacity and being an entrepreneur. But fundraising is never fun. I mentioned that backstage. I should take fun out of fundraising. Trying to convince investors that this is, especially when it's a emerging tech, it's always easier when it's something like a widget where you can say, oh, somebody else down the street is building this already. I'm just making it better, leaner, or stronger. It was tough trying to get folks to see the vision of, that down the road some point, we need to start looking at, some of these diseases at the molecular level and the type of technology that was still in its R&D phase. That was one of the biggest challenges for me when I took that asset from the military and tried to commercialize it, especially in Silicon Valley, which doesn't really have a strong connection to military tech. I spent about 18 months just, Death Valley, trying to raise my first $1 million to get this company off the ground. And it was tough, but, that persistence, and just staying in front of the individuals then led me to raise the first $1 million. I got to give a shout out to Secretary Shulkin that gave me, that helped me raise my first $1 million. They got a matching of another $1 million from a large global Viking in New York, and I was able to do about $2.5 million to get that company and the asset into a product market fit.
Wow, thank you. Stephen, over to you.
Well, I think one of the themes that you're going to continue to hear this morning is just the grit and determination. Remember that after 6, I think, or 7 years, 60 to 70% of companies don't make it. Many of them, I think it's probably the 15 percentile over the first year, don't make it. And to have that resilience and that grit that just most don't have. I mean, you think that you just naturally have it, and I can tell you that, coming from, talking to my friends and my brothers and sisters in the military as they talked about it, it was just really fascinating that when they come out, it's just that no quit attitude, and no one gets left behind. Even as we become successful, the part is that even the lowest person in our organization is at the top of our organization. And I think that's one of the things that you don't often see in the corporate environment, that mindset is not the same. The mindset that we see, bringing them on and having them be able to help, is that really just that tenacity and the grit that'll take you to the finish line. So I think it's just one of those great things that I think sometimes you wonder and you ask in that, is it just innate, or is it something you can develop? And I say, at the end of the day, it's innate. It's something that you just naturally have, and that it just comes to the forefront when you're challenged that way.
Thank you. Kieran.
ZeroEyes, we've raised a ton of money. For one thing, I think the entrepreneurship world looks at success and how success is benchmarked probably inaccurately, right? We tend to really lionize people that raise a ton of money. Raising money, the first, I remember raising the first like $50,000 and we were like, holy shit, this is amazing.
Right.
And so the first like $2.5 million, that's a knife fight all the way, right? You're selling someone else on your vision initially. You're selling, especially in the early days, you're selling people on your team. And then as success comes, you're able to raise money more easily. But here in the U.S., I think sometimes we have the priorities wrong. I think that you look at folks like Elizabeth Holmes, right, or SBF. These guys have raised hundreds of millions of dollars on flawed concepts and flawed execution, and quite frankly, a flawed team. So the valley of death is it's nonstop, right? There's no faking it until you make it anymore. The valley used to be heavily predicated on that. And some companies were able to do it, and they made it, and others didn't. But nowadays in this market, there's way more attention on, getting back to the fundamentals of a good business, right? How to become profitable, how to make a service or a product people actually want to buy. So right now, the value of death is continuous for these companies, and particularly with companies that are heavily where we heavily rely on the government, because the government comes with challenges, as has already been sort of talked about here. And I think the good news is that it's getting easier. And one of the things I hope to talk today a little bit, maybe down the road in the panel, is how we can get policymakers behind that. I think we're starting to see the wind change a little bit there.
Mm-hmm. Kieran, I'd love to dig into that a little bit more, just how ZeroEyes has approached driving that policy change at the state and federal level.
Yeah, so our company is heavily predicated on selling a subscription software that can basically detect firearms, right? And one of the biggest policy issues our country faces right now is the gun debate. And every time that there's a mass shooting, as we just saw, this debate gets pushed again to the forefront. It's on the top headline of every major newspaper. And you have people on both sides of the aisle that propose solutions that aren't necessarily pragmatic or really even effective. Our particular stance as a company is that we're not a political company, but we're building a software that is a layered approach to the problem. And that's one of the things that we really have to sell policymakers on. I would say right now that 90% of my job is limiting a policymaker's perception of risk when it comes to backing a specific vendor or technology. But realistically, that's the way that we're going to help solve this problem. I've learned a lot. We've learned a lot as a company going down this route. But Tom alluded to this. Right now, the ZeroEyes team, we have legislative efforts in about 10 states. We have a legislative effort here federally. We start educating policymakers really on the emerging security market, and then we move into quite frankly, how can this help them politically? The other thing too is when our team goes and we start talking to folks, the number one thing that I look at when we move into a state is who are the veterans that are decision makers. If you're a veteran, you probably already know this, but we come from the biggest fraternity and sorority in the world. And it's the most supportive of anything that I've ever seen. I think we undersell that as a community. So ZeroEyes starts with the veterans because realistically, they're for the most part, they're more pragmatic in a lot of cases than some other folks, and that's where we start. And here on the Hill, right now there's 94 veterans in Congress between the House and the Senate. It's the biggest veteran class we've ever had, at least in recent memory. And these are the folks that ultimately I think are going to drive change. So that's typically where we start.
I want to shift gears just a little bit. Kieran, you mentioned entrepreneurs like Elizabeth Holmes or SBF, and how do we balance those ethical considerations, whether it be data collection and where that data ends up, or now as AI is starting to become a part of almost everyone's life. How do we make sure we're using AI for the right things and not the things we shouldn't be using it for, and how do we manage those data collection and data storage piece? Yusuf, I'll start with you.
And indigenous AI, that's kind of where we saw the future. The level of data that we're now using to look at disease risk and even just the pathogen. The last couple of years, you've seen AI really speed up innovation. The biggest, again, from the clinical side and healthcare side, the biggest conversation right now is around sequencing your data and using that data for health outcomes. It's the way of the future, but there's also some policy issues that's always been around privacy and collection of HIPAA type of data coming out of the FDA. That's something that we take very seriously at Indigenous AI. So we try to make sure that the individuals that are going to be on our platform have that trust. That's a big thing right now that hasn't really transcended across the entire population, especially within the minority communities. And so, we've been driving that initiative to increase diversity in clinical trials because we're now moving into an era of precision medicine. However, our databases are pretty much, 90% European white males. And so you could think about that moving into precision medicine. There's no women or minorities in these drug trials or cell and gene therapy. And so that innovation now relies on AI. But there is some concerns, right? The digital divide that still exists, we don't want that to transcend where the bias is going to be with what was happening in clinical care, lack of access in certain population, to then transfer to these AI models. And so one of the things that Indigenous AI is doing is making sure that we road test. Same way I did in military, we tested medical equipment up in Aberdeen. We have to really truly spend effort and time to make sure that these technology are not isolating one subpopulation and not addressing, disparities that have always existed. Just because we're moving into AI, that's not going to solve it. We need more diverse workforce within that space so that everybody at the table. We talk about team. You want to have a diverse team. Having a team of healthcare professionals, just European white males or all African American, that's not going to drive the type of innovation that includes everybody. And so inclusion is a big piece of what we're focused on. But the data privacy and security and blockchain is now something that's being looked at from the fintech world in the healthcare, because it's all about data privacy. But the innovation that's coming down the pipe and how we could look at and predict disease outcomes and catch these things, early detection, early prevention, outweighs the risk, but we just have to be able to manage that as well.
Thank you. Stephen?
Well, I think first is like anything else, you have to start at home. One of the things that we made a conscious decision when we launched our Pelocity was that each individual owns their own data. We wanted to make sure that as we were watching as how companies were acquiring, I think a lot of people don't realize, like Amazon bought Ring. And so now you're thinking about how Amazon is collecting this data. Now they have Ring collecting that. And depending on the generation, they don't realize the integrity of their data. And they're allowing it to be utilized globally for some nefarious acts. I mean, I think that we're seeing the various, whether it be, not to get political, but the media channels and things like that, people don't realize they're actually playing that because they understand the neurons, our brains, and how it fires and everything else, and really delivering that content. So for us, it's really about creating an infrastructure, having boards, collaboration, looking at how that data is being shared and utilized to make sure that it's not getting into the wrong hands, so it's misused. Today when we think about ChatGPT, that today is becoming really fascinating, and we've been having a lot of really fun conversations at our University of North Florida in North Jacksonville, excuse me. And it's really been interesting is the kind of conversations that, from either side as you're talking about it, obviously some want that data to be accessible to everybody. And then you have the other side but I think there's a kind of a happy medium there with that data and information. But I do believe moving forward that people need to be more aware of how their data and making sure that their data is secure.
We spend a lot of time on this educating policymakers. It's really important. I think there's a couple things. One is, there's a lot of misconception about AI right now and how powerful or accurate AI really is. I heard an anecdote a couple days ago, and I think people are worried about ChatGPT taking their jobs, right? And someone said, AI is not going to replace humans, but it's going to replace humans who don't know how to leverage AI. I thought that was really interesting. So I think that is the future, and that's what's coming. As far as data collection, data privacy, all that kind of stuff goes, the United States right now, we are at a crisis point around where data comes from and where it's generated. And this has been brewing for a long time. And a large amount of it is based on data collection that comes from overseas, particularly in places like China and Eastern Europe and India. We can't really kid ourselves. There are bad actors out there right now. And for too long here in the US, because we're a very free market and we're very commercially driven, we have been okay with certain bad actors collecting on US citizens and our data. And I think the good news from a bipartisan standpoint is that we actually have a Congress now that wants to take action and limit that. So we're going to move really heavily into a period of protectionism. I also look at this as being a good thing, though, for US AI companies, computer vision companies, because for a long time we were always worried about competing with something that was cheaper or maybe less effective coming out of China or somewhere like that. It's going to be really important here in the US moving forward of knowing where data is coming and where it's going and how it's monetized. And I can tell you from the ZeroEyes perspective, we don't monetize other people's data. I think we made that decision 5 years ago when we started the company. And I think back then it was a bit of a risky decision because there have been so many success stories of big tech monetizing data successfully. But we looked down the road at the future regulatory wins and said, hey, I think that there's going to be a pushback against this. I think looking back, that was absolutely the right call to make.
Thank you. And then last question before we open it up to the audience questions. Is there anything you would have done differently up to this point? I'll give you a minute to think.
Like in life or
Just sure, yeah. Okay. If anyone's got anything, kick it off.
I mean, I got, okay, so I can tell you one thing. We as a startup, we've made every mistake in the book. So there are certain like tactical things I probably would have done differently. In some cases, we hired the wrong person into the wrong job. We chased shiny objects when we should have been more focused on other things that would have sustained the business. These are really common mistakes I think that most first-time founders and most first-time guys and girls that start companies do. So there are certainly some decisions I would have made differently. But looking forward, I was saying this earlier, but every day's a roller coaster, every day's a knife fight, and it's how well you can kind of bounce back and recover that I think are important. So mistakes are going to happen, and you just have to be able to be flexible and pivot around them whenever it happens.
Yeah, I'd like to add just simply that I was reading a recent book, and we were talking about Steve Jobs and Apple, and what was really fascinating in their early stages, you get to a certain point where you're trying to appease, the potential funders and things of that nature, and you would hire consultants. These high-priced consultants, you bring them in thinking that they're gonna, they're gonna light up the pathway for you. And what I found out is that they're not very good consultants. I think if you find the people and you bring in, as you've heard Kieran and others here, Yusuf say, is that if your team is passionate, if they're all agreeing, you figure out how to work. I mean, in our team, we're a small, scrappy team, and it's amazing how we get so much done. People look at us, and when we present ourselves, they go, you must have like hundreds of people, and we tell them we don't. And they go, well, how do you get it all done? Well, technology and belief in the people that come and work with you that have the same passion that you have, that have that no-die attitude, that no matter how difficult it will, and you heard it up here, is that it is a roller coaster ride, and we have no one to talk to. If you think, where's our therapy coming from? We get to, hang out with guys like what you see up here and have those kind of conversations and realize that they've got all the roadmaps and there's tons of books out there and everything else. But really, at the end of the day, nobody knows how to get there better than you. And that effort and the time that you invest and the passion you have is priceless.
Yeah, no, I think I echo the sentiment that's been said. The biggest thing for me in the area that I'm in, you got to have people that believe have the same drive and passion. There needs to be something with the team that resonates with everyone. It doesn't have to be the same disease. So the experience I've had in companies that I've started, the core group has to understand that mission, and that's where having that military mindset really comes in hand. Now, I've built teams without all military folks, but the common theme for me has been there's always been something that each individual, whether a family member or a brother or someone in their family struggled with that disease or that medical condition that gave that person the passion, even though they don't have that condition, to kind of join. And so, in building teams, I've been lucky enough to have a good understanding of what I'm looking for and what skill set that I don't have that those individuals could bring to the table. Because if you're the smartest person in the room, then that's not a room that you want to be in. And I've been able to hone in on that and bring the smartest and brightest in each different vertical. So if you look at my team, each person brings something different to the table, and that's what creates that unity and that teamwork that's always been mentioned, because you get to lean on each other to learn different aspects of the business as you grow it. And so, that's been fundamentally for me an area where I've made sure that even when I'm coaching other companies that are coming out, of startup land and coming up with ideas, is make sure that the first 2 or 3 team members that they bring on board all have that same passion and that drive towards the same direction.
All right. We only have a few minutes left here, so I'm going to try to hammer through these so we can get them all in. First question, as veterans are considering transition and are particularly interested in an entrepreneurship path, what should they be reading, listening to, or learning to be prepared?
I think the first one is Startup CEO by Matt Goldberg. That's a great one, I think. I remember 10 years ago when we started looking in this space, what was fascinating, there was very few opportunities and organizations out there, but you have like Bunker Labs. O2O just launched their new entrepreneur program. There's just so many programs out there today that they're doing such a wonderful job and really providing the roadmap that you need for that success. And it's just, for anyone that doesn't in the military, when they're transitioning out, I think Kieran said the best. I mean, you have people go to Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Columbia and George Mason. They go there because when you leave there, it's your network. And like you heard him say, is that you have the largest network and alumni in the world. And you need to leverage that. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I think oftentimes that's one of the biggest things is they feel that they come out and they don't need, they're afraid to ask for help. And everyone, I'm sure here on the board that's on the panel this morning have all shared the same story, is that, not being afraid to not have all the answers and be able to reach out. I mean, the Bunker Labs and all those are just really great organizations that are really providing, kind of the stepping stones that you need for that transition.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo that. I mean, there are a ton of military or veteran kind of themed organizations that are out there to help folks that want to do this. And Bunker Labs is great. There's obviously a ton of like self-help starter books, podcasts, whatever out there. The most impactful one for me was a book called 0 to 1. It's based on Peter Thiel's notes when he was a guest lecturer at Stanford in the MBA class there. And really put a lot of stuff into perspective. It's really quick reads, like probably like 50 pages, not that bad, so check it out.
Thanks.
So I'm a hands-on kind of guy, so I don't really do all the book reading. I like to dive in. But to the point, I mean, you have groups now like the NYU Veteran Future Labs. There's been more effort by, and I applaud some of the groups that are now creating an entrepreneurship path, because not everybody wants to go down the road of working for somebody. So I started off in that bucket where there wasn't a lot of opportunities then, but over the years I've been invited to talk to other entrepreneurs that could get the baseline just going through some of those courses. They have a good entrepreneurship program. Barclay funds that program up in NYU. DAV Patriot Boot Camp, that's also another one that kind of help you think through if this is really what you want to do. And so, it'll save you a lot of time and money and headaches, as we had to do with trial and error. And then you get to hear from, we call ourselves old guys now that's been in the space. You get to learn from, so you don't have to make all the same mistakes that we made. So I think, having those programs have been essential. Stuff what Hill Vets does and Bunker Labs. I think there's now been a deep push, and I commended DOV for just going in and acquiring Patriot Boot Camp. I think that was an excellent idea because we need to start fostering ideas that I know a lot of our veterans have, but just need that little push, and having an ecosystem of equal mind individuals in the room to kind of say, no, it's not a bad idea for you to start this business, because that's the lifeblood of what America is on, is entrepreneurship. And so I'm glad to see our military ecosystem is really creating, these beginning programs to kind of help you think through legal, the incorporating stuff, which is where some of the biggest mistakes could be made when you're starting a company.
Kieran, this one, it's a great question. I know this will apply to you and the ZeroEyes founders. If you were passionate but not a subject matter expert, how do you get the experts on board to your vision?
That's great. I mean, it applies to everybody. But yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's trial and error more than anything. And, we spend the first 2 years, most of us, I think, who are at least trying to, raise money and all that kind of stuff. We spend the first 2 years basically trying to sell people on the vision. And that's before there's a product built or, something that's viable out there. So you're selling yourself and you're selling the vision, and you're trying to attract people that can hop on board. One of our co-founders likes to say that with ZeroEyes in particular, it's kind of like Ocean's 11, the way that we brought people into the organization, where like everybody knew a guy or a person that was a good fit, and that's kind of how we built the business. We're also extremely nepotistic at the company. We have like a large amount of people's family members working, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a shared vision across a common set of ideals, and the fact of the matter is we've been really successful hiring people's spouses and stuff like that to do certain roles in the business.
I think one of the things is really culture. I think that what's interesting is that culture really attracts like-minded people. So I think that if you're developing a culture, the word gets out. I mean, people, are seeking you out to come to work for you. So I think really culture is really a major driver in building your organization.
I think what the panelists said is pretty true. Culture, having that, the buy-in, which is important when you're building, a 2-3-man team that has to do everything. And I think, having that understanding of what you bring to the table versus what your co-founders will really kind of help those long nights when you have to put financial statements. I had to do that last night. We have to put financial statements together. You have no idea because you don't have an MBA background. You have folks that you could call at one of these, whether it's Bunker Labs or, again, you reach out to your network. So I think, the phrase has been your network. Your network is your net worth. Is very important, and I've been able to utilize and get a lot of free service by the community that I've built over the last 6 years.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. Thank you for everyone for attending. Appreciate it.
Thank you.